All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating today.
Okay.
The Islam way of life.
Mm.
But we're going a bit deeper than just the religion itself.
Okay.
We're looking at a Wikibooks chapter that claims to lay out a path
Right.
to inner peace, strong relationships, and even societal progress.
Oh.
Sounds pretty ambitious, right?
Yeah, definitely ambitious. One of the first things that struck me about this chapter
Yeah.
was how they frame the whole conversation.
Okay.
Instead of using the typical terms Islam and Muslim,
Right.
they use the assent and the assenter.
Interesting.
It's subtle, but it really suggests a broader perspective.
I see. Yeah.
Like, this way of life isn't limited to one particular faith.
So are they saying that this way of life existed even before Islam as we know it?
Exactly. That's their argument.
Wow.
They define the assent as accepting and submitting to a scriptural discipline,
Okay.
something they believe has always been around. They even point to figures in Judaism and Christianity, like Moses and Jesus, as assenters who embodied this surrender to divine will.
Okay, so how does that fit in with the Quran then?
Right.
Are they saying it's not important?
Not at all. They still see the Quran as the authentic word of God,
Okay.
but they place it within a lineage of revealed scriptures.
I see.
They believe the Quran is like the complete and final version of the monotheistic message,
Okay.
correcting any distortions from earlier messages.
Right, so I'm starting to see how they're putting all this together.
Yeah.
But how does this assent actually play out in daily life? The chapters mention things like finding inner peace and understanding God's limits.
Yeah.
What does that look like practically?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Sure.
For instance, the chapter in Limits talks about God's guidelines. Not as strict rules, but more like flexible boundaries.
Interesting.
Meant to protect human rights and well-being.
So it's not about strictly following the rules,
Right.
but about understanding the wisdom behind them. Can you give me an example of one of these flexible limits
Sure.
and how it connects to protecting human rights?
They talk about inheritance laws within Islam.
Okay.
Some people might see these laws as strict or outdated,
Right.
but the book argues that they actually ensure fairness and prevent exploitation,
Interesting.
especially for women and children who might be vulnerable otherwise.
So it's about looking deeper and understanding the real intention behind these principles.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that spiritual principles are connected to everyday life.
Okay.
They believe that following these limits leads to a more just and harmonious society.
That makes sense. Now, I'm curious about this idea of inner peace.
Okay.
The In Straight Path chapter focuses on that, right?
Yes.
What's their approach?
It's not just meditation and mindfulness, it's much broader than that.
Really?
They emphasize aligning your actions with your beliefs.
I see.
Living with integrity and having a strong connection with the divine. True inner peace, they say, comes from knowing you're living according to God's will
Uh-huh.
and fulfilling your purpose.
So it's not just feeling calm, but having a deeper sense of alignment and purpose.
Exactly. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And they're honest about the challenges.
Okay.
They acknowledge that striving for the ascent is an ongoing process.
I see.
Even the most devout people face struggles and setbacks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's refreshing. They're not presenting some perfect utopia.
Right. It's a realistic perspective.
Yeah, that's important.
Definitely.
It's good that they acknowledge that it's an ongoing journey.
Right.
But how do you stay on track?
Yeah.
What tools or practices do they suggest?
They really highlight the role of the Quran
Okay.
as guidance. There's actually a whole chapter called In Guidance
Right.
that explores how to engage with the Quran.
Okay.
Not just as a holy book,
I see.
but as a source of practical wisdom and spiritual nourishment.
So it's more than just reciting verses?
Yeah.
It's about really digging into the meaning
Exactly.
and applying it to your life.
That's it. They emphasize studying the stories in the Quran, reflecting on the teachings,
Okay.
and using it as a framework for making decisions and dealing with challenges.
Interesting.
They even say that wrestling with difficult passages
Oh, wow.
or ideas that seem contradictory
Okay.
is all part of the process.
Makes sense. You're really engaging with the text.
Yeah, it's about an active relationship with it.
Right. Not just passive acceptance.
Exactly. And they argue that this active engagement is crucial for personal growth and transformation.
So the Quran itself is like a test
Yeah, in a way.
to help you examine your intentions
Right.
and improve your character.
Exactly. So there's a big emphasis on personal development.
Right. But what about relationships with other people?
Good point.
How does the assent play into that?
Well, there's a whole chapter on that too,
Of course.
called In Lasting Personal Relationships. They emphasize things like compassion, forgiveness, and honesty.
Hmm. That seems pretty standard for any ethical system.
Yeah, but what's unique is their emphasis on fulfilling your responsibilities
Oh, okay.
within those relationships.
Interesting.
Each person has a specific role to play,
Right.
and true harmony comes from everyone understanding and upholding their obligations.
So it's not just about being nice.
Yeah.
It's about actively contributing to the relationship.
Exactly, and they even apply this to the wider community, saying that the assent has implications for building a just and progressive society.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
We've talked about inner peace, relationships,
Right.
and now societal progress.
It all ties together.
How do they connect all of this?
Well, that's where the last chapter comes in
Okay.
success.
Hmm.
They describe a society built on justice, compassion, and knowledge.
It's interesting.
They believe that when individuals follow the principles of the assent,
Yeah.
it creates a ripple effect, transforming the community from the bottom up.
So it's not just about individual salvation.
Right.
It's about making the world a better place for everyone.
Precisely. True success, they say,
Okay.
lies not just in personal achievements, but in contributing to the greater good.
And leaving a positive impact for the future.
Exactly. It's a pretty compelling vision.
It is. But we've been focused on just this one Wikibooks chapter.
Right.
You mentioned there are other books
Yes.
that go deeper into specific aspects of this way of life.
Exactly. Like Islam in the World,
Okay.
which looks at what's happening with Muslims globally. It helps us understand how these principles are being lived out.
Right, so we see the real-world implications of the assent.
Yes. And then there's Quranic law of nature.
What's that one about?
It's more philosophical.
Okay.
It explores the relationship between God, nature, religion, and science.
Interesting.
From an Islamic perspective.
So it looks at how the Quran's teachings fit with scientific discoveries and natural laws.
Exactly. And if you're looking for something more spiritual or devotional, there's Quranic supplications.
And what's that?
It's a collection of prayers and supplications from the Quran.
Oh, I see.
It gives you a glimpse into the Islamic tradition of devotional practices.
Wow, so there's a book for everyone.
Right. Global context, philosophical foundations, spiritual practices.
Pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that despite their different focuses, they all emphasize the importance of seeking knowledge and understanding. They encourage readers to engage with the texts actively, to question, reflect, and ultimately reach their own conclusions.
So it's not about blind faith or dogma.
Exactly.
It's about cultivating a curious mind.
Right.
And a thirst for knowledge.
Absolutely. That's a powerful message.
It really is. Yeah, it really challenges how people usually think about religion.
Right. It's not just about accepting things blindly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole assent thing. Is it really possible to fully submit to something bigger than yourself and still be an individual?
Right.
Doesn't that mean giving up part of who you are?
That's a question that's been around for a long time.
I bet.
But what's interesting is how this book looks at it.
Okay.
They say that the assent isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding your truest self.
So you're not becoming someone else's ideal.
Right.
You're aligning yourself with something deeper.
Exactly. It's recognizing that your journey is part of a bigger picture.
Okay.
And real fulfillment comes from connecting with that greater purpose.
I see. That makes sense. But isn't there a danger with this kind of thinking?
What do you mean?
Couldn't it be used to justify intolerance or even extremism?
I see what you mean.
If you think you have absolute truth,
right,
wouldn't that make it easy to dismiss or even condemn people who disagree?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And the book actually addresses it.
Oh.
They're very clear that the assent is about peace, compassion, and understanding.
So true submission is about humility.
Exactly.
Not arrogance.
Right.
And respecting everyone is essential.
Absolutely. They argue that the best way to spread the message of the assent is not through force,
I see.
but through living it out yourself.
Leading by example.
Exactly. Your actions speak louder than words.
That's a good message no matter what you believe.
I think so too. But what about people who don't believe in God or a higher power?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Is there a place for the assent in a secular context? I actually think there is.
Right.
The core ideas of the assent.
Like what?
Acceptance, surrender, and discipline can apply outside of religion too.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, well, accepting could mean being honest about your strengths and weaknesses and facing reality head on. Surrendering could be letting go of control
Right.
trusting the journey.
And embracing the unknown.
Exactly. And discipline could be sticking to your values, working towards your goals. Yeah.
And showing up for yourself and others.
Even when it's tough.
Yes. So it becomes like a guide for personal growth and self-improvement.
Wow. I like that perspective.
It's all about how you look at it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yes.
what's the key takeaway you want our listener to leave with?
If I had to pick one,
Okay.
it would be this. The ascent, whether it's religious or not, makes us look at our lives and ask, what principles do we really believe in?
I see.
What guides our choices? What kind of impact do we want to make on the world?
That's a great question, and something we all need to think about.
Absolutely.
So to our listener, I encourage you to consider what the ascent means for you personally.
Yeah.
Maybe it confirms what you already believe.
Right.
Maybe it challenges you. Or maybe it gives you a whole new way of seeing things.
It's a journey.
Whatever your takeaway,
I
hope this deep dive has inspired you to keep searching, keep questioning,
Right.
and keep growing.